Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Mad Palace podcast. My name is Aden Ng, author of the Chronicles of Terra web serial novels and the host of today's episode. For those just joining us, the Mad Palace podcast is a podcast by a group of writers of varying backgrounds, publication histories, experiences, and genres. We're here to talk about anything to do with writings and stories and storytelling in general. Let's first be introduced to our guest.
I'm Jennifer Black, author of the Black Pearl series, mostly, young adult fantasy series. And I think that's all we do for the introduction.
I'm Kathy Joy, author of Lexus, Last One to the Bridge, and The Gatekeeper. First two are sci-fi, last one is a bit of everything, action, adventure, dimension hopping.
And I'm Laura Morrison, writer of Come Back to the Swamp, which is a slipstream novella, and also an as yet unnamed book which is being published by Spaceboy Books.
Okay, so today our topic is about naming things, mostly anything in general, about stories, your chapter titles, your book titles, to your characters. And I want to start off with book titles, because that's the first thing you see when you are reading. And do you guys have any opinions on what's the importance of properly naming a book title?
It's really, really important, which is kind of why I was hoping this was going to be, a how-to for me, because it's not a skill that I have.
Me either. That is why the book that I have coming up with Spaceboy Books is as yet unnamed, because I cannot do it. It is so hard for me. Thankfully, somebody who works at Spaceboy Books is really good at naming stuff, and so he's actually going to do the naming, so I luck out there. But with the self-published stuff and then the things that I have on Juke Pop, it's just, I have no idea.
Yeah, sometimes I know what to call something, sometimes it gets a working title. Sometimes I'll come up with a name, but I'll really regret it because I don't think it suits it. And sometimes I just can't think of one at all for the life of me. I've got one at the moment, which at the moment is just called The Hex Files. That's not its final name, but that's what I'm calling it, and I'll think of a title later.
So
that's what I always tell myself, and I never think of a title later.
So how often do you guys, when you have a temporary name and you end up using it in the final book?
Oh, I do that all the time.
Yeah. Oh, I don't even. I think a lot of the ones where I just can't think of one. I just think, oh, I've got my other work, Lexus, at the moment. I might have to think of another title in case I get sued by the car company. And I can't think of one, so I'm just gonna hope that they don't sue me because, it's not about a car in space. That would be fun, but it's not. A car space pirate. Be fun.
I'm gonna write that book now. That sounds so fun.
You should be. If you do, you can't call it Lexus. You'll have no car names. Like,
could I call it
Mercedes?
Mercedes.
Yeah, just change it slightly, just a little bit.
Right. Do you Oh, I'm hopping to character names even though I had something else to say. Do you ever find that you're just trying to put in placeholder names like for people and you end up choosing either very similar names because it's the first thing that comes to your head, or you have started everybody's placeholder name with the same letter or something like that? You just seem really attached to P's or something like that.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes, I do that. All the time. I'm very attached to like W's and C's, lots of C's.
K's.
I don't really have that. I can't write a character unless I know their names. So sometimes I can spend weeks going on those baby naming websites. And I'll try and find a name that suits their personality. So I'll be like, oh, I want like a in the Hex Files, I wanted a character with maybe a flower name or a plant type name, but I didn't want it to be like Rose, and I went everywhere just to find the right name. And I wrote down a list in my notepad, and there is just a wall of text of like, 3 or 4 columns of names. I feel like if anyone picks it up, they might think I'm a serial killer or something.
That's true of so
Like
many
some names are
things,
crossed
too.
out, like no, not that one. I was like,
What did you
nobody
wind
with
up
that
with?
name comes up missing. That would be bad.
What did you wind up with?
Willow in the end.
Nice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right at the very end, going
I-
from A to W. That was the last one.
I feel like that's something that you see a lot in published books and even TVs and scripts, is that the authors and writers often chooses names with meaning, and when you're a reader, it always seems like such a smart thing. Like it's a clever thing that they do. They give names the meaning that behind names, or the title of maybe the book, the chapter, or the characters. But when it comes down to it, you really don't always want to do it, do you?
Oh, yeah. Sometimes it adds a level of either cheesiness or unreal. Like, people don't always end up being exactly what their names are.
Mhm.
So it's a little on the nose to have every single name be a perfect descriptor of that person.
Unless
I
it's
actually,
Unless it's like a really obscure reference, and then all of a sudden you're pretentious.
yeah, I actually with naming, I honestly try to think about where the character might have come from and what their parents might have named them in the situation they were in, or if they were orphaned or something and came up with a name, like where the name would have come from, instead of finding a name that fits that character. I try to think about what they would have been named. I'll do that sometimes.
So it a name that follows the history of the world that you're writing in.
Yeah. That sounds really impressive. I don't know if I've actually. I have put that much thought into.
So when we're naming titles and chapters, you don't want to give away too much of the content of, say, the book or the chapter that you're naming, right?
Oh, that is so hard. You'll
So
get
sometimes
attached
a
to
little.
something. I'll get attached to something or a really clever word, and then I'm like, this is too. It's just a huge spoiler. It ruins the whole book or the whole chapter. I can't do it. I really am in awe of the clever chapter title namers. They're amazing.
I just can't. When I'm writing a silly book, it's really easy because I just like do some nonsense name for my chapter titles. And then when I'm writing a more, what was that? I'm sorry.
No, like Come Back to the Swamp.
I actually don't remember whether I put chapter titles in there or not. For the ones that are more serious, not that I ever write serious books, but the more serious ones,
like
I just say chapter 1 or chapter 2.
Right. I mean, like Come Back to the Swamp, the book title itself is very on the nose.
Oh yes, that was like the one title I ever came up with that I was proud of.
Yeah, it didn't give
and the
away
story
anything,
pretty much
right?
named it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it gives away anything, but I was pretty proud of it.
Right. What about Kathy?
I have a couple of methods for naming chapters, and I suppose it all comes down to how I'm feeling about a project. So when I did the Brotherhood, as an exercise to see if I could keep the chapters on track, I would try to take a line or a bit of text that was actually in the chapter, but also it would have to be a line of text that summed the chapter up, and if I couldn't find it, it could mean that the chapter was just blathering on about nothing, in which case I might have to have another check. But at the same time, like you say, it couldn't necessarily be something that gave it away. So it might be like like a partial bit of a sentence.
Right.
Or
Like some of those books that the title is blatantly the centerpiece of the story.
Yeah. But I think when I don't do it as something that is specifically in the text, I try to make the title whatever sums up the chapter. But with the Hex Files, what I'm finding they seem to be a reference to is a lot of movies. But they're relevant. So one of my titles is something like Witches and Dragons and Werewolves Oh My or something.
You can't have
It's
it.
relevant.
You can't have a title review too much, but you can't have it be irrelevant to the story either.
Yeah, exactly. So you gotta. I think it depends on the story as well, because I find a lot of stories that rely on suspense that I've read so far tend to have quite short, punchy chapters, if they have a chapter title at all. Sometimes it's just 1, 2, 3. Sometimes it'll be like Lost or Falling or,
Right.
and you'll think, oh gosh, what's happening now?
Some of them don't even put in the word chapter, they just put in one.
Yeah, just like one.
It's I think it sets the mood, names and stuff.
Yeah, the only actual, I don't know, sort of advice that I have is that chapter and title naming, it's something that either I'll see it right away or I won't see it at all. And that usually means I need to sort of think outside my own box. And social media is really good for that as especially self-published author. If you can get your little writer group and feed them a little bit of information, they can sometimes, even if they don't come up with the right chapter title or character name or whatever, they can get you out of your box that you're stuck in. So getting other people's ideas right away sometimes will help me from falling into a black pit of horrible naming.
That's actually
is so true.
Yeah, that's not bad advice either.
Yeah, I learned that trick from you, Jen. Twitter has helped me with a lot of chapter names and even a few book names.
A little off the topic.
I was joking about that. My advice for this podcast would be just hand a list of rules over to Ryan and JA and say, come up with titles for me, because I literally did that for my last self-published book, The Memory Spell, because I wanted to be really clever and have every chapter title be some clever reference to memory or thinking or remembering or forgetting or the past. And I do not do puns. That is my writing thing. And I didn't want them all to be silly puns, but I needed them all to use memory words in a way that was clever. And I was completely out of my depth. I knew what I wanted it to look like, but I couldn't do it myself. So I outsourced that one, and I'm pretty pleased with them.
What a little off topic is what do you guys do you guys know any books or chapter title that you've read recently or maybe in the past that is that you would consider clever?
Oh yes, but I actually can't think of it right now, but it's actually the people who are publishing my book, not to plug that too blatantly, but there is for Space Boy books, there is a book that they have that is the main character is like it's in the future, and the main character is like he sort of is looking back to the past and thinking about how things were in certain ways better in the old days, and he sort of starts this sort of kind of revolution, and the title is called The Retroactivist, and it's just so clever. It's just he's an activist.
Oh, okay.
About for the past, retroactivist.
Oh, okay, that's really
and it's super clever. And so yeah, that's one that sticks out for me.
Actually, there was a series, I do not remember what any of the titles are, and I don't have any of the books anymore, they've gone missing. But there's a series that's really influenced writing and probably chapter writing, which it's a series. It's called Broken Sky, and it's by Chris Wooding. So not only were his chapter titles like bits of text from each chapter that told you about the chapter, at the front of each book was a line from within the story that summed up the whole book, and each book was also a single word that used to sum up that particular book. So when you would look at the books, you could read the single words, and it would spell out for you the plot in a single word.
Oh wow.
Oh my gosh, stuff like that is so clever. I want to be that person. Like that's what I aspire to be.
Yep.
My brain just I cannot. That's really impressive.
Well, what about character names? Do you guys have any experience with clever character names?
Just the opposite for me. I just randomly pick names. And I always think I'm going to change them, and then I never do. Like, usually I'll be driving down the road thinking about the story, and I'll see a random road. Like, Warren Road is a big road in, like, it runs through the Detroit area. And so I just was driving past Warren Road once, and that was, like, that turned into the main character for one of my books. So he's Warren, and it's, like, in this fantasy world, so it's really out of place. But so many of their names are out of place in that book. It's a really silly book.
Do you write a lot of Warrens?
No, just the one Warren.
I've had a couple of occasions where it's like I've named a character and then investigated the name a bit further and actually found out that maybe I'm a bit more clever than I think I am, or rather, I'm quite lucky. For example, the serial, my most recent one, which is in the Summer Writing Project, I looked for a name, which I came up with was Rava. And I thought it sounded good. I looked it up. It means star. And then I didn't realize that. It just looked like the right name and sounded right. I wanted something kind of short, but also something that fit her ethnic background. I did it again in the Brotherhood, where the lead character was called Cain, and I knew I wanted that as his name. But I looked it up, and the Irish meaning of it means little warrior. And obviously he ends up becoming, a warrior, a demon slayer. And then with the Hex Files, the lead character Aubrey, I wanted a really old-fashioned name because the character is a fairy, so he's quite old. And I found that name. But when I looked at it further, another meaning for Aubrey means King of the Fairies.
Wow.
Awesome.
And I didn't even know that when I got it. It just sounded like the right kind of old-fashioned name that a several hundred years old fairy would have.
I think that's interesting.
That's cool.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like if sometimes the sound of the word just influences even the meaning and the feeling you get from the word itself.
Exactly. That's only happened a few times, but it makes me feel quite clever. And if anyone asks, that's totally why I picked that name. It wasn't an accident or anything.
Right? I'm sure somewhere in your mind you knew the etymology of the name, and subconsciously you chose it for that reason.
Yep. Yes. Absolutely.
So in the Black Pearl series, there are more, but one of the main group of people have 4 sort of distinct regions where they're from. And I got to a point where I had to name a whole bunch of side characters. And so each of the 4 regions have sort of a distinct thing about them. One's sort of an ocean country, one's sort of jungly, one is mountainous, and then one is sort of your medieval fantasy place. And so that was fun. I named based off of sort of their region, like oceany names, or the mountain people were naming their children after gemstones a lot, and the jungle region were sort of planty names like ivy. And so I try to make the name fit the world at some point, at least in my head.
I think that works for naming true history, like in the past, if you're the son of a carpenter, your name is maybe John Carpenter or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you name your characters around the world that you are. I find that when I've been writing fantasy a lot because of the Chronicles of Terra series, and I find a lot of joy in actually coming up with names, because in Terra, there are some figures in Terra that are actually multiversal copies of figures from our world. So, for example, like Sherlock Holmes in our world, there is also a version of Sherlock Holmes in Terra, but her name is Shirl Octavia, and you can only hear the name of Sherlock when you say Shirl Oct, and you coughed in the middle of it. So the character was introduced in the short story I wrote for her as a Shirl Oct, and she choked on her own name. But like that's a name that came out because I wanted to make a joke of it, you know. But
Yeah.
I think if you can find a angle of fun for a name, you could, push for something interesting.
I do that in the Gatekeeper. The first world is a superhero world, so there's a guy who owns a big newspaper company, and his name is like Smithy Smithson, which I'm sure.
That's awesome.
But people really do that. I mean, they really name.
The mnemonic
People.
names,
Yeah.
like 3 H's, 2 S's. The Marvel does that a lot. A lot of their characters have like following alphabets.
Yeah.
Peter Parker, and the name. Suddenly, I can't remember any of the names.
Yeah, there's loads of them. Oh,
Yeah, Kamala Khan.
Oh, Spider-Man especially has
Yeah.
a bunch of the
yeah.
double.
Their characters have a double. Oh, I'm a terrible nerd. I can't remember anything now.
This was on an episode of Big Bang Theory where Raj, the character on there, just lists all of them where they go to meet Stanley in person to sign it, and he says like, "Oh, I'm going to talk to him about all of them," and like one of them is something like Millie the model or something. And so he went behind everyone. So when he signs it, he's like, "Oh, to my friend Howard, Excelsior," and then it gets to Raj, and he's just like, "To Raj," because this is after he's been like, "Why do you name people like this?"
What about
Oh, there's Otto Octavius as well.
right. What about naming places? That's a different ball game, isn't it? Like naming a country
Yeah.
or a city. How do you guys go about
my
it?
goodness. My main world doesn't even have a single name. I'd say place names are the hardest. Either they are complete placeholder names that I eventually change a few letters and see if I can turn it into something, or they are just a bunch of sounds smashed together to become something that sounds good to me. Places, yeah, that's probably the hardest for me.
I agree. I think it is for me as well. There are some stories I've written where I actually never even named the place.
I do that.
I have like most of the ones that I write, I think there is no name for the country or the city they're in or whatever. I just don't do it.
Yeah, it's really, really hard. I sort of for the Hex Files, I have to have a name for this city with all the magical creatures in it. And I came up with the placeholder of Haven because it was a haven for them, and I couldn't think of another one, and I thought that one's been used a lot. So I kind of got around it by saying that its original name used to be Axis Mundi, which it means something. It escapes me at the moment, but it does mean something. But everyone just started calling it Haven.
That
So
makes
it used-
sense, though.
yeah.
That seems kind of natural. Where even if you give something an appropriate name or a fancy name, people do seem to name it by what it does, or a simpler concept. So that seems kind of real world to me.
Yeah, that was my thinking, and that's absolutely what I'll say to anyone who asks.
Exactly.
I got really lazy once, and I named a city city, and an empire empire, but I just changed the letters so that they spelt differently, but when you read them out, they read the same. So
Those
city
are my
is
favorite, though.
yeah, city is spelled CITI, and empire is spelled AMPYRE. I just read
Those
that.
are things in books that I personally, as I'm reading, do not notice until someone else says it out loud or points it out.
Yep.
I will not notice stuff like that. So you can slip things like that by me any day.
Oh, that's such a as a writer who I like to write names that have references and stuff, and it sometimes hurts me that nobody gets the references.
Oh, exactly. I have so many things that I feel are inside jokes with myself.
I am just really impressed that you guys are like I think I'm so bad at naming things that I just have given up and I'm like, I can't do it. I'm bad. I won't do it. Like, and then I just give garbage names to everything. You guys put so much thought into this that it's really making me feel like I'm like I should be trying harder or trying at all.
I mean, that's fine, right? Not having to put too much thought into naming things. For my first book in Evening, I purposely went out of my way to name everyone, or at least as many of the characters I can, simple names, because I wanted the characters to be everyday people. So I have Tim, I have Stella, Clay, simple names that Howard, and
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've heard from people that are readers and not writers that have said that it's actually a big obstacle to them when they get 10 characters dropped on them that have those weird names with apostrophes and Y's strung together and X's where they shouldn't be, and just the really like creative or even meaningful names that just are hard to remember, hard to know how you would pronounce them. So there's some benefit in not out clevering yourself and just coming up with names that are really easy for a reader to hang on to.
Definitely. I'll say that's what I do.
Yep, and stick to it.
Yep.
all right. So I guess we'll call it a day for today. I feel like there's more to talk about for this, but we are running out of time, so maybe we will get the chance to explore it in a future episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, once again, my name's Aden Ng. I'm the author of the Chronicles of Terror series, a series of fantasy novels. You can find me online, on Twitter at Aden_Ng, or at my website adenng.com. And thank you for joining us today. Today for our guest we have
Jennifer Flack, author of the Black Pearl series. You can find me on Twitter at Jen with 2 N's Snork, over on Facebook with the Black Pearl series, and at Wattpad and Amazon. Just look for Jennifer Flack. FLATH.
And I'm Kathy Joy, author of The Gatekeeper, Lexus, and Last One to the Bridge. You can find me on Twitter at Kathy_H_Joy.
And I'm Laura Morrison, writer of Come Back to the Swamp and my unnamed book with Spaceboy Books. And I can be found on Facebook at Laura Morrison, writer of Stuff, and at Twitter where my handle is Pony Riot.
Right. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and I hope we will see you back next time. Bye.
And I'm Laura Morrison, writer of Come Back to the Swamp. And oh my gosh, sorry. You know what? I simply can't do this without actually having it written down. And I'm Laura Morrison, writer of Come Back to the Swamp, which is a slipstream novella. And also, I'm sorry, I cannot do it if it's not written down. My brain doesn't function unless I'm writing. I cannot speak.
I know, right? That's probably
Okay.
enough. You could talk about curse if you wanted.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess, I mean, there's no point in
Oh,
mentioning
you
the one...
wanted to say the publishing thing. That was
Oh, yeah, the other guy.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
one that-
the other guy.
Not even
upcoming.
named.
Yeah, definitely mention that. Okay.
So
Because
I would
we'll
say
find the
beep.
spike.
Yeah. And then,
I
then I
think
have to
I've heard that.
I can try it, but it'd be hard to proceed after the beep without laughing.
Well, we've already done it, so Aiden will see like a big spike now.
Like, why wouldn't you go, if you're Richard, why would you say,
Rich.
why would you go Dick when you could go Rick or Rich?
I suppose because when the name was first made, Dick didn't mean necessarily what it means now.
But, like, why?
Yeah, but it does
But in
now,
this day and
and we
age,
all
why?
know.
Yeah.
Why? I've known some currently that no, I mean
Mhm.
no.
Yeah,
I
like
think they're-
back in the old days when I was Catholic, the priest, his name was Father Dick. And I just didn't understand why.
Yeah, you say that. My dad used to work with somebody whose name was Richard, but he liked going by Dick.
Yep.
And he used to say that he always hated the phrase dickhead. And my dad was like, well, why? And he's like, well, how would you like it if I called you an Allen head?
Wouldn't really be a thing. I mean,
Yeah, it's not a thing.
wouldn't-
I mean,
I wouldn't mind that much actually.
no, yeah.
It would
That's
be
what,
fine.
that's what my dad said. He's like, well, I don't care. Yeah, my name doesn't literally mean penis, so